Join us for our fifth webinar in our mini-series on transformational change leadership and change management. I'm joined today by David Poirier and Karen Calder, both from the Poirier Group, and appreciate them taking time to share their experiences and insights and wisdom with you regarding how to be more successful as you embark on your transformational change leadership programs and initiatives. So thanks again for joining us. We'll share with you how to get access to a recording. You'll receive a post-webinar email tomorrow around this time, and so look for that, and it will give you access to both the recording and the presentation itself. I'm going to tee up the session real quickly here, and then we've got some opening questions for David. And then David will pass the baton to Karen, and then we'll finish up and talk a little bit about what's ahead. So the purpose of this transformational change leadership and management mini-series is really sense making. This is a domain that's a domain of interest that's grown. It's complex, got a lot of complexity to it, and there's a lot of people that do it wrong, and there's some people that do it right. So, you know, our job is to help you sort through sort of that muddle, sort of, that you see there in the middle of that slide. We've our early webinars, back starting in December, really focused on how you drive transformational change at the individual and team level. I started working with David back in the early 90s when he was at Loblaws, and I've worked with him probably in 3 or 4 major transformations since then over the last 30 years. And it seems like, David, you always started with, you know, that egg picture, sort of. You always started by tackling people at a people level and getting people ready for change and ready to contribute to positive improvement. So that's why I focused the first 3 webinars on that. It really, David, was sort of a summary of the boot camps that we did when we were back at Loblaws. And what we've been doing increasingly is starting to migrate from the individual and group focus to the organizational level focus, which is what we're going to talk about today. And we've also published an article on change leadership and management. It came out the 1st of March. So for those of you that are members, you can access an article that summarizes what we've been looking at in this mini-series. If you think about the context within which change is led and managed today, you got 100 years, well over 100 years of formal efforts going all the way back to Frederick Taylor and Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, the sort of mother and father of industrial engineering, so to speak. And some of you have a sense of this evolution that we've seen in terms of principles and methods and programs and so forth, and tools and techniques. And that evolution has translated into slides like this. So I borrowed this from Eduardo Toledo, who's a colleague of David's and mine. He's a member of CISE also. And this was a presentation he did. And this is a 20-year picture. This slide represents 20 years of the evolution of organizational excellence and operational excellence at Flex, which is a very, very large global manufacturing firm, very diversified. So I suspect that most of you could create, or you already have an example or a slide that looks exactly like this for your organization. When you think about all these things that have been happening for the past 20 years in most of your organizations, that's a lot of change. And so that's really the context within which we want to be thinking about how do we accelerate that change. So it's not whether you're improving or not, it's how fast you're improving. Can you improve faster than the rest of the guys? That's what really matters. So too often, transformational change leadership initiatives start with the wrong intuition and analysis. And I borrowed this from Dan Ramson. I didn't know him until this morning. I just was Googling the unconscious incompetence slide, and I found this, and I loved it. He's a design leader, and if you don't know about him, I'd encourage you to click on that and study some of the work he's done. But I think too often when we think about how we plan for and execute change leadership, we do start from an unconsciously incompetent position. And I don't mean that as a criticism, it's just an observation. I am willing to be wrong about it. And so as a result, we get this modeling that goes on. So most transformation efforts that I've been a part of, and I've viewed either from a distance or I've been up close and personal, they're messy. They've been messy. And they haven't been particularly well thought through, and they haven't been particularly well executed. And that creates a lot of yield loss and sometimes ends up in not getting the job done. So what we want to do today is this is from Sengay's book, The Dance of Change. And I think it's a good industrial and systems engineering model. We want to help you understand, how do you create enthusiasm and willingness to commit to something better? How do you get people to invest in change initiatives? How do you create and manage networking and diffusion? How do you create personal results for people? And then how do you translate those personal results into business results? So that's the systems dynamics model that I think, David, you and I have been working with. Really, it's been running in the background of everything we've done since Loblaws. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to David a little bit here, and I've put together 5 questions. You don't necessarily have to answer them in that order, David, but as I said, you've been involved with 4 major transformations from an executive leadership position. And now that you're with the Poirier Group, the last 15 years, you've been helping other organizations to do the same thing. So lots of insights and experiences you can share, and sort of use these questions as a way to tee up Karen's presentation.
Great, thanks, Scott. I really appreciate you having us on this morning and sharing ideas with the team members. I think the term transformation is so overused, as is change management, and it means so many different things to different people. And you can really boil it down to saying you are where you are with your organization now. And for the most part, you could look at it objectively and say, we're not performing to our optimum. We're not performing as well as we could possibly be performing in today's market, or even more importantly, in tomorrow's market. And so organizations, particularly now, are starting to reflect on that and saying, well, how do we do that right now? Because it's getting a whole lot more competitive. The stakes are higher, interest rates are high, there's more competition, there's disruptive technology. And so how do we position ourselves for success in the future? And a lot of organizations say, let's do a transformation. And then everybody runs around and attempts to do process improvements or performance improvements in their areas of the business and summarize it all up and call it a transformation. And I think people have to really get a lot clearer on where they want to go and what that means. Now, I'll give you an example. I worked with a very successful hedge fund in the U.S. that was many billions of dollars invested, and they wanted to double the size of the business in the next 2 to 2.5 years. And it was interesting. There are 4 key senior executives on that. There's the chief operating officer, the chief executive officer, the chief compliance officer, and the chief investment officer. And so they all have different perspectives on the business. But what I found fascinating is when I got them alone and asked them, so what does this doubling of the business mean? And the CEO said, well, it means we're going to have substantial growth over the next couple of years. We're going to have a lot more clients investing in us, and we're going to have to perform in order to earn that money being invested in our organization. I asked the chief operating officer, and he said precisely double the assets under management in precisely 2 years. It was very clear to him it was going to be 730 days from that time that they were going to achieve exactly double the assets under management. And I asked the chief investment officer, and he said, it really means we're going to grow a lot. So whether we grow 40% or 100%, it's still way above industry average. And I asked the chief risk officer, and I said, what does doubling the size of the organization mean to you? And he said, it means trouble. It means a lot of risks that we probably shouldn't take. So here are four senior executives in an organization with vastly different views of exactly the same thing that they had been talking about for over a year. So their chances of executing well on that as a team are practically zero. And so we had to get them really clear on what does, as you and I call it, Scott, what does done look like? And how do we get there from here? And where are we today? And getting agreement on that. And frankly, in the work that we were doing over the last decade or so, we've seen more discrepancy of views around where an organization is than where it's going. And so some say, we're not so bad, we're pretty good. And others say, well, we're ahead of all the competition. Others say, we got to change something fast. And so getting people clear on where you are today and where you're going to be in the future creates a clear difference, a gap that people can begin to address. And when you figure out how to close that path in the gap, then it creates a sense of momentum. It gets people off of zero or off of an inertia and says, okay, we have to do this in a reasonable time frame to get going. That creates alignment within organizations, improves communication, builds better accountability, and eventually ends up creating better discipline within the organization. So I'll pause there, Scott. What's your
Yeah.
response or question to that?
Yeah. So that's sort of a foundational principle that you've got senior stakeholders, and they all see the same future, but they see it through different lenses, so to speak. And it means something slightly different to them. And so getting them aligned on what the end state, what they all choose for the end state to be, but then also starting to migrate them towards, because they all have different probably strategies in their head for how do we get there, right?
Right. And that's really important to get out on the table, because if you don't have alignment on that, people are going to invest in their own priorities,
Yeah.
potentially at the expense of others' priorities, which can lead to optimizing within departments or teams or functions and sub-optimizing with respect to serving the highest good of the organization overall.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an important, I guess, principle, I'd call it, and key to transformational success for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And probably the most evident area of that is IT. People either underinvest or overinvest, depending on the various opinions within the organization of how important strategic it is, how far ahead or how far behind they are relative to the competition, and with little regard to what you brought up before, Scott, which is at what pace are you improving the organization?
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean it's not necessarily critical to look at where you are within the industry, but it's way more important to look at how quickly are you improving relative to your competition.
Yeah. Readying in every at Loblaws, at MDS, at Hudson's Bay Company, you invested a ton of time and energy in readying the top team for the transformative work. Maybe speak to that a little bit. Now, it looked different in each of those four organizations that you were part of, but it was the same principle. It was the same objective, so to speak. You just did it a little different because the personalities were different, right?
Yes, yeah, they definitely were very different in those organizations, and you have to take that into account. It's not one solution fits all. There are fundamental principles that I know Karen's going to talk about that do apply to everybody, but the style and technique with which you address that within an organization has to fit that organization. just as you have to fit the right glove on your hand. And so you've got to find that right match. And uh, I people always say, well, let's get on with the transformation. Let's make the process changes. Let's, build the buildings. Let's invest in the technology. And that's an important piece of it, but and necessary piece, but nowhere near sufficient. Because if you don't have alignment within the organization, and I'm not just talking about leadership alignment, but alignment within the organization overall, then people don't know what their role is with respect to achieving that transformation. I remember working with an accounts payable group once in a retailer, and I was talking to them and said, "So, what's your role here?" And they said, "We pay invoices." And I said, "Is there anything more than that?" And they say, "Well, sometimes we don't pay invoices because they don't match the purchase order, so that's problems, and those are errors." And I said, "So what happens to those errors?" And they said, "Oh, they get resolved somehow. We send them to the buyer, the supply chain department, and they deal with those issues." And I said, "So what do you think happens when there is an error like that? What happens when you pay an invoice and it's wrong, or the purchase order is wrong?" And they said, "Well, I don't know. It doesn't matter." Well, you're receiving goods in the warehouse. It was grocery products at that time, and you receive goods in the warehouse, and if you receive less than what the paper says, we're going to be out of stock. And if what what is received is more than what's on the paperwork, then we're going to have an overage of product, and that product's going to go stale. And that affects how our consumers see us, our customers, because they're either buying stale product or they can't buy the product because we're out of stock. So do you see what your role is with respect to that? And you could see they started to understand that they weren't just shuffling paperwork in the background, but they actually had a role in satisfying the consumer needs and making sure that they were getting fresh food on time and available to them. Getting that sense of where they fit in to the overall value creation for organizations is really important, because to ask people in the absence of that, improve your business, they're going to push problems downhill as best they can.
Yeah. And, the other thing I wanted to sort of pick your brain on was at Loblaws, and I know that's the oldest transformation project we worked together on, but it was also the one that's most memorable for me because it's sort of almost a good to great story from Jim Collins' book, in that we took stock price from $6 to $60 in 10 years. So it literally was that S-shaped curve that Jim Collins showed in the visionary companies. And we did, and that was before that Jim Collins wrote the book, right? So if we'd have written the book, just think where we'd be today, Dave, right? So
Just imagine.
yeah. But the thing that impressed me about the work we did at Loblaws, and then the work that followed when you went to MDS and when you went to Hudson's Bay Company, and then all the other projects that you worked on, is you were able to get senior leadership to invest in, I'm going to use the word hard and soft stuff, and I don't like that term, but it's you were able to get them to invest in the soft stuff. You were able to get them to invest in readying people for improvement, readying people for change. And that was not a trivial exercise. I mean, that was a major investment of dollars, time, and energy. And you sought out people that were consciously competent. In fact, you sought out people that were unconsciously competent in that field because they'd been doing it, and they had really well thought through strategies and tactics, and you paid for partners. So this is sort of that last bullet. Why is having a partner important? I think people today, a lot of leaders think, I can do that. I need help with the technology stuff, but I can figure out the people stuff. And I don't think that that's true. I think you end up with people muddling through the people stuff, and as a result, tremendous yield loss in the organization.
Yeah, I agree, Scott. I think CEOs can affect a lot of change within an organization, and and to some extent drive the pace of change within the organization as well. When this work tends to be assigned to, senior VPs or VPs or directors within organizations, it's difficult for a director from Department A to go into Department B or C and tell them they're doing things wrong. They've got to change the way they do things. And, there's still a lot of hierarchy in organizations, most organizations. And as a result of it, there's a lot of resistance. And they're like, oh, here that person comes again. Oh, here comes David again. He's going to talk about that change and transformation stuff again. So give him his half hour, then we'll get back to work. And it's difficult to do it with people that you're so familiar with. Having that outside catalyst that's objective, that has the experience and that's gone through many of these transformations, brings some credibility and some confidence and some trust to the process that you can't necessarily get from doing it internally. And when people are saying, well, how many times have you done this before? Well, I've done it once or twice. Yeah, but that was a different industry or a different company. We're different. And so all the reasons why it can't be successful. It's really tough doing it internally. And so I think that external catalyst, as I used at all those organizations, and you were one of them, Scott, really helped to parlay that into a much faster transformation and much more objective one, quite frankly.
Yeah. And so, David is, my sense is that David is this strategic change master, and Karen is the operational and tactical change master. And I think Karen and I talked about this yesterday, and she sort of resonated with that description. So what I'd like to do now is migrate and pass the baton to Karen and have her talk a little bit about, okay, so how do some of these strategies and philosophies really play out when you start to do transformational change leadership and management? Karen?
Thanks, Scott. David, I'm reminiscing about the time that we worked together. I was the head of change management at Walmart Canada, and we did hire Dave and the TPG group to come in and really help us build out our change methodology, and that internal expertise really does matter a great deal. So just for those of you that don't know much about me, I have 30 years of leading change inside an organization, a lot of it not successfully, but great learning opportunities. But I would have to say the opportunity I had at Walmart to lead it through an organizational transformation. This was an organization through history had not had much change. And I believe my boss told me at the end of all of it that I did put change management on the map there. And but it was through a lot of heavy lifting. I think there's such possibility for all of us if we can get this right, if we can really help organizations and teams and leaders inside organizations, figure out that pathway forward, figure out how to get that Jim Collins flywheel, get that momentum going. Otherwise, we're just staying on the left-hand side in organizations and that doom loop and the status quo. And I certainly hear a lot of leaders talking about, feeling like they're stuck in that middle of that diagram there that you just showed, Scott, and we know what happens in that scenario. So human behavior makes corporate change initiatives more complicated, and it puts our execution at risk 1,000%. And if we don't do change well, we create resistance in an organization. And what I mean by we don't do well, leaders. So this is not about change management. This is about us helping leaders enable change in an organization so that there isn't that heavy lifting. But it does take leaders to really own the ownership of the change collectively. So not just one person on the executive team, and not just the executive team, but multiple layers in an organization, really understanding the change, embracing it, and acting as sponsors to support the execution of the change. But these are all the reasons Deloitte has cited for why change isn't successful. And I think we know this, but we don't know what to do with it. We'll go to the next slide. So there's critical ingredients to change success. I think you need a pathway forward. I think the not a typical change model, but a real clear, what do I do first, second, and third? And I think we need to create transformational change leaders. And by the way, leaders aren't just by title. We all lead ourselves. So it's really helping everybody in the organization lead themselves through change. So we're going to describe what that roadmap is really about. Jim Collins talked about the myths of change. I love this. So lots of organizations will say, we'll need a change management program. This comes with that launch event, that tagline, and the cascading events, and everything looks really pretty, and it's executed with a lot of fanfare, and then goes nowhere. I've seen a lot of that in organizations. I've seen a lot of organizations try to, incite change through a burning platform for change, but they don't really use the heart of why are we changing, what's not changing, how do I help people through change? So money doesn't motivate, fear doesn't motivate. We can't grow just through acquisitions, and change isn't hard, but we think it's hard. And we think it's hard and painful because we just don't have the pathway or the skill set yet developed to get us through it. So these are all myths. Let's go to the next slide. So I've studied every single change model that's out there. There's Lewin's model, force field analysis. I got that one down pat. Bridges, Cotter's I've used a ton. McKinsey, Kubler-Ross, and the Atkar model. And when I was at Walmart, the operator's eyes would just glaze over if I put up a model of sorts, and they said it's not practical, and it doesn't mean anything to me. So I really had to dig deep and create a model for change success. And so last year I worked with the Poirier Group, David and the team, with a client going through a large transformational project, and we applied the model I'm going to show you on the next slide, and it worked beautifully. And so this is not a program. This is the flywheel. This is that every step needs to be followed before we go to the next step. It builds momentum, and it addresses the phases of change. So there are 3 phases of change. Everybody's starting sort of in that stuck phase or that status quo phase. And what we need to do is that pathway to get us into the disruptive phase, that middle phase. That's phase 2 that Scott and David we're talking about. We're muddling in the middle. And then all of a sudden we get to this beautiful end state if we do it really, really well, or where people are adopting the change and they're embracing it. But it is messy in between. It can be a lot of hard work if you let it be, but if we follow these steps, so there's 3 phases of change that we need to address as leaders. We need to understand what are the challenges in each one of the phases and create an adoption plan or a change plan, whatever you want to call it. And then leaders have to follow these actions. And we also have created some just-in-time accelerated learning labs where we would pull leaders in, and we would teach them, how do you actually define the change in a way that provides the clarity on the end state? Because the one thing that every person going through change wants to know, they want to know, what are you expecting me to do, and can I do it? And if you can't answer those 2 questions, fear, resistance, uncertainty starts to creep into the organization, and that's the disruptive piece. It takes away from productivity and engagement, and this is where people start assuming things that aren't necessarily true, and it then kind of has people stuck in that change in the middle stuff. So
Karen, I wanted to
yes.
jump in and ask you a question about this. So I want to put this model in context. So I'll just keep using that Loblaws example, even though it's a little old. When there was I'm going to evoke the Russian doll metaphor, or the example. The doll inside a doll inside a doll inside a doll. So that's sort of the way change is from the standpoint of strategy and policy deployment. So there was a very high level vision for what Loblaws could be in 1998, in 1992. So 6 years in advance of it. And they worked to create vision narratives. And so there was, at the outside goal was this vision of what was possible for Loblaws in terms of number of customer relationships, the average profitability of those relationships, and the stickiness of the relationships. So back in 1990, this is pre-loyalty program. So think about it. They're sitting there and they're saying, we're going to have more stickiness. Well, how the heck do we do that, right? And so somebody comes up with a loyalty card, somebody comes up with bank inside a grocery, so forth. So my point is that this model is really happening at different levels at the same time from a deployment standpoint. So that's what I think makes the complexity of this, like build the change plan. Build the change plan for the distribution center, build the change plan for the grocery store, build the change plan for finance. You know what I'm saying?
It is really, I should have had a pyramid because it's really complicated when you do organizational change, because you have a change for you have a plan for the organization and a vision. But as you go layer by layer, so every leader needs to grab hold of their own plan and create their own adoption plan. That's what I'm talking about here. That's how we go in and help leaders build that understanding themselves, so that they're able to communicate the change, share the vision with alignment. Because the moment that one leader is out of alignment with another leader, people start talking, and then that creates more uncertainty. So it needs to be orchestrated. I used to call myself the conductor, and it was just ensuring that executive team, their two layers below, everybody was singing from the same song sheet to make it sound cohesive in the organization, to allow the change to happen at an accelerated rate.
So back to what David said a little bit earlier in the context of what you just said, is that Dr. Deming used to say, if everybody would work to optimize the performance one level above the one they're in, everything would be better.
True.
That's sort of what you want to do when you're doing plan, like that build a change plan. It's build a change plan, but back to what David said, if I'm building a change plan to optimize IT at the expense of finance, then I don't get anywhere, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, okay. The other thing is, I think that if I see real challenges is when you talked about that unconscious incompetent analysis. And so often what happens is, okay, I get the change and I get the end state, and then let's just move past and communicate. No, you can't. Slow down. Really assess that impact on multiple levels. Like, how ready is the organization for change? How much change have you put into the organization, and how complex has that change? Has it one change? Is it two changes, or is it multiple changes? Like, system changes, process changes, and if it's all of those things, like what we did at Walmart to implement the strategy there, it all has to go together and fit together. And if one's off, if one project is off from the other, it just, you're going to create more problems in your change if if you do that. So you have to really kind of think in multiple levels in the organization. You have to think at the highest level, in the middle, and then always, what is your frontline employee experiencing? How are they absorbing this change? Because often, we say we want one change at the top, but then you bring it down a level, that's 20 changes. If you bring it down another level, that's 50 changes, small incremental changes to execute on. And so we really need, it needs to be well orchestrated, well thought through. But that initial phase, really assessing your stakeholders, really assessing your organization, assessing your teams for that readiness, and what might they need so that you can support them through the change is critical.
Yeah, I agree, Karen, wholeheartely with that. I think there's so much emphasis on putting the plan together and having the plan look great. Here's 140 PowerPoint slides on what our plan is. And it's not focused on the people. And Scott, you mentioned, sort of the hard stuff and the soft stuff before. I see it more as the seen and the unseen. And so the seen things are, the technologies, the processes, the equipment that you buy, the buildings that you have. The unseen are the mindsets of people within the organization. Fear is very powerful within organizations, and it's the most powerful resistor to organizational transformation or improvement, for that matter, because people are uncomfortable going to an environment that they don't understand, having a different job than they currently have now, having different responsibilities and accountabilities. It creates worry about whether they could be successful in, I'll call it the new world. And as a result, they prefer to stay where they are because there's a comfort with that. And getting people out of that comfort zone is difficult. And that's the unseen stuff that doesn't get enough investment up front.
That's perfect segue into the next slide. But this is really how people experience change. I really love the Fisher model because it is like I have, off ramps. I'm going to go into denial. I'm going to stick my head in the sand and pretend like this isn't going to happen, or I'm going to quit, or I'm going to be really frustrated. And by the way, this isn't sort of a natural curve where it's linear. This is really messy. For example, I hired a change champion, a store manager, to join my team to help us change from face-to-face to online learning. And she was a change champion, hired her on my team, and within a week she didn't like what we were doing. She became a resistor. So this is the complexity of change. Human behavior, you can't predict it. So they either accept it, ignore it, minimize it, resist it, or quit. Is sort of our job as leaders. We could do a much better job, not necessarily preventing the ignoring it, but how do we address it successfully? Because there is a way to have a coaching conversation and provide the right level of support, but that requires us to be adaptable in terms of our style, and it does require us to have that intuition and tapping into the emotional responses of our team. We'll go to the next slide. Just from a practical point of view, I think that if you really want to start, down that road of how do I show up as that transformational change leader? The first place I always start with leaders is, let's go back to the beginning of the change and let's address your own emotional reactions to the change and get to acceptance first. Because if you're not at acceptance of the change in the organization, people know that. You may not say it, but your energy does, your actions do, and you are the role model for the organization. And so we have to get that first thing right. And then I think we have to look at change as not something that is an event. And we have to absolutely embrace the notion that change is possible. The good to great organizations have proven it. And it's a process and it's a journey, and there's a framework. There's a flywheel that you have to do on top of all of the other tasks. I know we are driving for results, but this is a result too. And if we're standing still, then we're just the organizations that are in that doom loop. So change isn't going away. So how do we embrace this framework? How do I, lean in and really learn how people respond to change and how to address the anxiety and acceptance? We spend a lot of time with our leaders creating that compelling vision. Often leaders write two sentences. It's so high level, it makes no sense for employees. We ever get those emails from our leaders and we read it and we go, what are you saying? So I really work with leaders to talk plain language. Put yourself in the shoes of the individual that you're talking to and relate it to them. What's not changing for them is equally important as what is changing. And also they want to know, how are you going to support them, and can I do it? That is their biggest fear. So let's understand all of that. Let's engage them. Let's involve them. Let's inform them. Those are my three favorite I's: involve, inform, and ignite. And it takes a bit of time, but when you nail that, man, I'm telling you, all of a sudden you get to the end and you have this success. And there's not one thing that you can point back to that says, oh, we did this and that made us successful. There isn't. It's a combination of all of these different, this plan, this orchestration, this real leaning in and helping people through the emotional side of change, and leaders role modeling and sponsoring and orchestrating and aligning the change in the organization. It's all of those things that really truly make the transformation happen. Scott, David, throw it back to you. If you had anything else you want to add. But by the way, the last thing I'm going to say is I think the number one skill that not just me, but the World Economic Forum actually has it on their 2030 skills as being adaptability as being the number one skill set. The second skill set that we all must create is critical thinking. And so critical thinking and adaptability are two really, really important skills for us to have in this time of disruptive and continuous change. But thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, so to if you thought about any one member of CISE, the group that Dave and I belong to, the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers, which is a group of 22 people, 22 organizations and the members are the senior leader of the industrial and systems engineering function in those organizations. So Boeing, Disney, UPS, John Deere, GM, Duke Healthcare, Emory Healthcare, and the list goes on. Again, 22 organizations. Sobeys from Canada. The people that are members of that group, their job is to constantly be creating strategy and tactics aimed at improving what we do and how we do it. You've got thousands and thousands of people in UPS that are out there just doing their jobs. And so every once in a while we come along and we say, hey, it's not enough to just do your job. We want you to do it this way instead of this way. And so, and not only that, every once in a while we go to them and we say, hey, we not only want you to do your job, but we want you to participate in helping us figure out how to do your job better. And guess what? You might lose your job if we succeed with that. So I think that, if you keep peeling the onion back on this, at one level, it's about human beings doing their work, performing in the seat in the bus that they're in in the organization, and doing their best. And like Deming said, willing workers doing their very best, right?
Absolutely.
But then what we see is their very best isn't good enough. So then we come along and say, hey, we have to do it different because it's not competitive. So that's the crux of this change leadership and management is human beings are feeling that, and it's frustrating at times for people to be part of that process, to be on the receiving end of it.
There's a couple of questions, Scott, that are for me in the chat that if we had time, I'd like to address.
Yeah.
So Jose asks, do you have a slide that lists a series of activities or actions? That absolutely. We have a whole set of tools and things that are underneath there. That phase. In fact, under define the phase has 3 tools. Almost every one of them has 3 or 4 tools that we offer. Under assessing the change, there is assessment for the organization. There's a risk assessment. There's a stakeholder analysis and assessment that you need to do. So we have all of that. Just reach out to me. I can talk to you about those tools. And then somebody was inevitably, yes, David. Jack asked, and David, I'll throw this over to you. So, any additional thoughts on sustainability part once you have started a movement successfully? Thoughts, David?
So a couple of things. One, it's not a smooth path. There are going to be mistakes made, and address them up front. And, if you don't address them, people will start to rally around, well, that didn't work. I wonder what stupid thing they're going to do next. And that negativity starts to breed. So address it up front and say, yeah, we're pushing the limits here. We're identifying opportunities. Not everything's going to work out. And it's okay because we're being innovative. And so some things are going to work great, some things are going to work well, and some things won't work. And the things that won't work, we're going to change and we'll address it in another way. So they feel that sense of momentum. I think that's really important. And Jack, I think you and I have talked about this a long time ago, the importance of having measurement in place so that not only can you tell where you are within the project, but you can share with others the gains and wins that are happening around the organization, both the tangible numbers as well as anecdotal stories of we've now taken 1,400 hours of mundane work off of this group that they don't have to do anymore. And so they can get on the real value added work that they're supposed to be doing. Those sorts of things are really important. And so having that measurement front or the visibility is critical, not only in the beginning, but ongoing and at the later stages of the transformation as well.
And I'll just piggyback on that, David, just in terms of like a practical action item that I ask all the leaders to do and to run their teams through as a pick up and let go exercise. So there are habits that we get into in organizations, and some of them are positive and productive, but others are not. And if we don't take a minute just to examine that through the change, we might have to let go of the ways of working that are getting in the way, and that could be mental habits as well, our mindset about certain things. We get very attached to a technology, or we get very attached to a process because that's what we've used and we've been successful in it. And yet it is no longer serving us in the organization. It's not getting us it's not getting us to where we want to go. And so we really need to dig deep into the ways of working in order to make change stick. It's exactly the same as losing weight. You have to identify the habits that you have and let go of the ones that don't serve you and start exercising and eating healthy are new habits. Changes like that too inside organizations.
And that's one of the things that I believe we focus on in the accelerated learning labs is there's a lot of different flavors of those learning labs. Back when we were doing Loblaws, we called those things boot camps, but nowadays we've sort of gotten away from that terminology. But there's a lot of personal and professional mastery. So again, Karen, to your point, trust. So how do we build trust? How do we understand what we can count on others for? What are the tendencies and habits that serve me? What are the tendencies and habits that don't serve me? Am I conscious about those? How do I seek feedback so that I can see things that I can't see, that I'm not aware of? So those are all examples of how accelerated learning labs can reshape people, cause people to become more conscious, to think about things differently, to see things differently. And that can accelerate the rate of improvement, which is what we said was the key objectives. David, jump in there.
Yeah, I want to respond to Holly's comment about, for the folks on the front line to address fear and anxiety, sort of spoon feed the incremental change. And I think that's a good approach to things. But I'd also encourage you to give them the end game as well. Get them to understand the context in which that spoon feeding's happening, so they don't just think, why don't they stop changing everything every week here? So that as you are incrementally adding changes to that, they understand there's a journey that they're on with a clear definition that makes sense to them, that they can relate to and they can see provides the betterment for the organization, more security for them, perhaps even better compensation for them in the end because the company's stronger as a result of it. So I think it's really important as you're spoon feeding those things to get really clear as well on, hey, this is a long journey and we've got lots to do, but here's what we're doing for now.
That's a good point, David. You have to answer the questions: what is changing? What's in it for me? Address my issues, and then tell me what's not changing. Those are three absolute questions that all employees will want to know. And change doesn't happen, or communication doesn't happen once. My rule is you have to take one message, communicate it 10 times, and in 3 different channels for it to stick in people's minds and have them really understand it.
Yeah.
So it takes a bit of time.
David and Karen, I want to go back to this model for a second. This is sort of the high level. This is a simple systems dynamics model. So you've got reinforcing loops. The R stands for reinforcing loop, and then there's a B. There's what's called a balancing loop. So we don't have any balancing loops in the model, but And then there's these delays, and I wanted to talk about the delays because, when we were at MDS, Dave, you were there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and I was there for, I think, maybe 5. I may be off a little bit on that, but so a lot of work that we did as we were deploying and implementing and executing strategy to transform that business. We made a lot of investments, and again, the delay function is a challenge because you're promising, right? So you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, because the benefits realization, there's going to be a lag between investments you make in change leadership and business outcomes and business results. So I want to just talk a little bit about that. How do you play that game with senior leadership and boards, for example, right?
Yeah, and I remember the chairman of MDS, a wonderful person from one of very very early industrial engineering programs in Canada, and he said you have to learn to be patiently impatient. And
Yeah.
he let me struggle with what that meant for a while before telling me in great detail. But so you do have to be patient for the results. You have to be impatient for getting the necessary things done to keep the progress and keep the momentum going. But you have to be patient for those results, and you have to believe in those results as well, because you'll get those negative forces along the way saying, "Oh, we haven't seen anything yet." But if you're sure about that, manage people's expectations around it. Hey, we're not going to see these results for another 6 months, but we're doing it now because it's critical to who we're going to be a year from now.
Yep. And Karen, to your point, it's the flywheel. Once you get that flywheel spinning, it accelerates, right? But you got to get the flywheel going, and flywheels are heavy by definition, right? So it takes a little bit of energy to get them moving.
Well, it's so funny. I'm just responding back to Holly because I was saying, too much change, not well orchestrated and not well planned out, and not kind of done, you haven't done the right analysis is hard. But if you do the right work up front in the beginning phases of our change process, where we walk you through how to build what David was talking about, the right vision, the right business case, change impact analysis, and you orchestrate that effectively across the organization, and everyone is aligned and your leaders are prepared, it's not as hard. It's doable. I've experienced it. I know what that feels like when you get through that middle and you're starting to build that momentum. There's no other feeling like it. It's the best feeling in the world. And employees they're like, they even forgot that they were in the middle of the change. They're just into acceptance of the new ways of working.
Well, I've done. Sorry, Dave. Go ahead. Jump in.
There was a question on how to measure change, and so I'll let Karen respond to the boxes she showed before, and focusing on change and that. Focus on the results and the outcomes that you want. Make sure that you've got measurements in place for those, but also the change elements. Avoid doing the traditional change management checklists of, have the emails been sent out, and, have people been communicated to, and it drives me crazy when we still go into organizations today where they said that's the change person over in the corner. They're taking notes on this meeting, and I wonder what kind of notes are they taking, it's important to make it really practical. So change isn't the outcome that you want. It's the results that you want that come from the change. So it's important to measure that progress, and I'll let Karen chat on that. But it's also very important to stay true to the key metrics of success for the organization and watch those dials turn. Because if those don't move in the end, then you've changed a whole lot, but to what end?
Yeah. Well, this was great. I think it worked out exactly the way we planned it, right? So thanks, Dave and Karen, for great jobs. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and I thought it flowed really well, and I think our audience appreciates it very much. as I mentioned, we've been doing a whole series of mini-series, so to speak. We've done them on AI and op analytics, and now leading transformational change. The article in the upper right-hand corner shows up in the ISE magazine if you're interested in reading a 5 or 6 page article on the topic. The webinar will show up on the ISE website. It'll be in that change leadership and management bucket, so to speak. So again, you'll get a link by email tomorrow, and it'll take you directly to that IISE site where you can get a copy of the recording and the webinar. And it'll show up once you click on that button. It'll show up again in that file, and it'll be Change Leadership and Management 501 right at the top of the list there. So that's where you go and click on it. So what's ahead? 28 March, we're going to finish out the mini-series in Change Leadership and Management. APQC has been around for 30, 40 years down in Houston, Texas. They're world-class in benchmarking things like transformational change leadership. And so they're going to talk to us about what they've learned in their benchmarking research on sort of best-in-class tactics and strategies for change leadership. So look forward to having you join us for that one. And then on the 12th of April, we're going to launch into our Healthcare Performance Excellence mini-series. And the first one is going to be interesting. We're going to look at healthcare performance through the eyes of a patient, a caregiver, an advocate, as opposed to looking at it through the eyes of a leader of a healthcare organization or a doctor or a nurse or whatever. So sort of a customer-centric view of things. So look forward to seeing you in both of those webinars. Also want to put a pitch in for the IISE annual conference, which will be in Montreal this year. Wonderful city. It'll be at the Convention Center, which is a great venue. And CISE, the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers, will be meeting on Saturday, and then we'll have our Performance Excellence sessions on Sunday. We also will have an AI symposium, artificial intelligence symposium, that James Swisher is putting together for IISE. That will be held on Saturday, the day before the conference starts, and I'd encourage you all to consider coming to that symposium. I will be part of that. David will be there on Saturday also with CISE, so you get a chance to run into us and come up and shake your hand and talk to us, and we'll get to know you. So that we'd love to do that. And with that, I'm going to end and hope that everybody stays healthy and safe and enjoys life as much as possible. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, David. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.